what do you see, or like what might be some common, say, mistakes or, pitfalls that health tech companies should be wary of, especially when thinking
I think
about
that's,
AI?
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, and I think that's a good question, right? I think sometimes, there's always a technology hype, right? We see that in the Silicon Valley all the time. And sometimes we've seen that companies sort of bring the Kool-Aid too quickly and try to attack the most difficult problem right away. And I'll give you an example with IBM's Watson AI. If you remember a few years ago, there was a big sort of push from IBM to use Watson AI and everything. And they entered the healthcare space too. And they tried to attack the most difficult problem of giving physicians clinical recommendations on the best treatment courses right away. And this was a few years back, right? When AI was also still developing as a technology for healthcare. And I think the adoption just didn't happen. And a part of that was because, like I said, it's because you don't really know why Watson is recommending A over B. So the makeup of the recommendation not being there, rather than taking incremental steps towards that. Sometimes incremental is not bad because you have to change the way of working of physicians in terms of having them trust the tools. And secondly, giving transparency. I think this is the most important aspect, right? That if even if the physicians want to trust the recommendation, you need to give them verification saying why A is better than B in this case, because in another patient case, B may be better than A as the treatment outcome, right? So showing sort of what is making up the recommendation, right? So I think those two things we saw in one example there, that tech companies really sort of going all in without understanding the nuances of what makes up sort of the decision making for a physician, and then helping them in that direction. Now, let's say in the consumer world, when you search on Google saying, oh, how do I do something, or what's the best way to do something, you look at the Google recommendation, or using any AI search engine, you're not really always looking so much as to why Google is saying A is better than B. And so now, even in fact, with Gen AI, even Gemini and so on, they started showing the sources of that recommendation. So they're doing that in the consumer world as well. But doing that in the healthcare space is tremendously useful. And that's where I think the health vendors, health tech vendors have to be really keeping the emphasis on that the recommendation they give is based on clinical literature, peer reviewed articles, and so on, and not just read it forums where you have to make sure your recommendation is coming based on solid clinical evidence that published, peer reviewed, and so on, as well as from industry bodies, like in the case of oncology, it's National Cancer Institute and so on, not just something else, right? So that physician needs to know that your recommendation is grounded in scientific evidence and literature, not just something that it's reading off the internet, right? So that's critical.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point that you call out, because we always look for evidence, like why, and as humans, we want to know the reason behind something. Also, because AI can be very non-deterministic at times, and this is where it's required, and till it gets better, till, because especially with AI, there's so much hallucination still happening, that
Right.
if you
Right.
don't provide that, I think, proof behind the scenes of the
Yeah.
recommendation, and I think that is why it is hard as of today, but hopefully that's what gets better. And this is where, like you said, companies need to be very careful in not sort of following
Yes.
following the trend.
Yeah, yeah, and then maybe just one more point to add there. Even if AI is right almost every single time, if they give a wrong recommendation even one time, and that leads to certain outcomes that are not desirable, that's gonna cause the trust to go away rapidly. So I think, and that's where the mission criticality comes in, right? You have to be right almost every single time. It's not being right 90% of the time or 95% of the
Yeah.
time, right? So for the physicians to develop trust, you have to get it right, or you have to not give a recommendation rather than hallucinating, right? I think that's the danger we have here with AI hallucination, that if it doesn't know where to go, it will make things up. You don't want that. And of course, there are safeguards that the vendors are putting in place for all these. Now these are being done by the tech companies, but then health tech vendors who use the tech, they have to put additional safeguards in the healthcare space on top of that. So that would be another area that we have to watch out for.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to see all this, right? Because it's a matter of life and death. You can't like lose trust. Like one offense is not okay.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, if you're
yeah.
just like doing some random content generation, it's okay if it's hallucinating or something like that. But in this situation, like if a doctor breaks your trust, you're not going to ever go to them again. So it's yeah. This is such an important point.